Hey you guys, welcome back. So today I'm going to start something new. I'm going to do some reviews on some of the places that I visit. And you know, I want to keep it real and be super transparent. So I'm going to call these Keeping It Real reviews. So earlier this week, I just got back from Isla Holbox, which is a tiny little island north of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. And I was super excited to go because about a year or so ago, I saw some photos posted from there and I had never heard of it. So I was super interested in just a new place to visit in Mexico. I spent my birthday week in Tulum, and right after Tulum, I decided to head up to Isla Holbox for about 4.5 days. So the only way to get to the island is by ferry. And the ferry leaves from a small town called Chiquila in Mexico. And Chiquila is about 2.5 hours from Cancun and about 2.5 hours from Tulum as well. So we ended up taking a car from Tulum to Chiquila. And when I tell you we were driving through the middle of nowhere, sometimes I don't mind long drives, like if they're scenic, but there was absolutely nothing to see along the way. It was just straight road with like jungle on the side for miles and miles and miles. And then like every now and then we would cut through like a small little town, but it wasn't a lot going on. There's like no cell service. So if you're renting a car and using your GPS or using like Google Maps, keep that in mind because you will lose cell service for at least, I would say, like 45 minutes to an hour of the drive. Now, once we got to Chiquila, now this, I want to note that I went in November, early November. So this is at the tail end of hurricane season, and the Yucatan Peninsula did experience quite a bit of storms like the weeks leading up to my trip. But when we got to Chiquila, it was flooded. Like we got to the ferry stop and it took us forever to go down this short road because we were just going through huge puddles, and just the infrastructure does not support heavy rain. So after 2.5 hours on the road, we get to the ferry stop in Chiquila. It costs 200 pesos to take the ferry, and the ferry is 30 minutes. There are 2 different ferry companies that run on the hour, but alternating 30 minutes. So you have a ferry that you can get on every 30 minutes. So the ferry ride was fine. It was pretty smooth, and the 30 minutes went by fairly quickly. Now, once we got to the island, honey, it was flooded. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm gonna throw some pictures up here in a second. So look at this.
So upon first glance, one might think this is the Venice of Mexico. No, these are not canals. These are regular roads that vehicles are supposed to drive down, but it is totally flooded. Instagram versus reality.
Yes, totally flooded. It was impossible to walk anywhere on the main roads. Like you had to figure out some sort of route that you could move around, and it was like this the entire time we were there. Now towards the end of the trip, like I would say days 3 and 4, it was really sunny, so it started to dry up a little bit, but there were still huge puddles, and the road that my hotel was on was completely flooded. Luckily there was like a little I guess like a raised sidewalk on the edge. So we had this one little path that we could use to get to the beach because we were 1 block away from the beach. But if it wasn't for that, I would have had to take a taxi everywhere. Now, let me also mention, there are not really any real cars on the island. You see a few, but all of the taxis are actually golf carts. So they have some regular golf carts, and then they have these big heavy duty golf carts that have bigger wheels. Those are the ones that you want, because I would say about 3 out of the maybe 6 taxi rides that we had, we were in a smaller golf cart and they kept cutting off in the middle of the puddle. And when I tell you, I was so stressed out because I'm like, if this thing doesn't get started, I'm just gonna like have to die on this golf cart because I'm not getting in this nasty water. The puddles were up to your calf, like the high part of your calf. And it was just absolutely disgusting. A ton of dirt and litter was floating around in the streets, and it just was not the welcome to the city that I wanted, because that's exactly how we were welcomed to the island. Like, hi, welcome to this island that you've seen on Instagram, and everyone's told you it's super beautiful and super cool, but it's totally flooded. Again, like I said, this was early November, the tail end of hurricane season. So if you went during the dry season, maybe this wasn't your experience, but I think that it's worth sharing because I think people need to understand that the infrastructure on the island is not set up to support heavy rain. So just know that if it rains and it rains hard, there is a possibility that your experience will be like mine. So if I had to give some advice, I would say definitely do not go during rainy season at all and give yourself a little cushion. I wouldn't even go right before rainy season begins and right after it ends. Like, give it some extra time just to set yourself up in the best way possible. And I personally wouldn't come all the way from the US to go there, and that's like my whole trip. If you're like a digital nomad and you're living in like Playa del Carmen or something like that, and you can look at the weather right before you go, like a few days before you go, and plan a last minute trip, I think that's kind of where I would bucket this place, because for me, it's not worth it to go and the whole island's flooded. So now that we're done talking about the water that was not supposed to be on the island, let's talk about the actual water, like the beach. For me, the water was a little underwhelming. I know that Cancun is like super touristy and I'm just like over Cancun. However, I will give Cancun the credit that like it has some of the most beautiful water. It is so turquoise and super bright and like just the most beautiful bright blue. And I felt that the water in Holbox was just kind of basic. Like, if you just like a beach for the sake of the beach, then you're fine. But if you're expecting like this crystal clear, super turquoise water, it's not really there. Now, I will say that the water was significantly better on my last day, and I think it's because when we first got there, we were coming right after like quite a few tropical storms and thunderstorms, so the water was just a little murky. But the last day it did get better. But even still, I think when you are comparing it to other islands in the Caribbean, I don't think that the color of the water really like compares to some of the most beautiful water that you'll see in other parts of the Caribbean. Now, the thing that I was the most hype about and I was just geeking out over was the bioluminescent beach. Very underwhelming. Google Images, you lied. Like, I don't know what kind of camera they were using, but it did not look like that. Now, the guy did say that for whatever reason, the day that I was there, maybe I was just really unlucky, but the day that I was there, there was about like, it was like 30% visibility of what he normally sees, which not sure how he calculated that. And I'm really curious to know like what he normally sees, but it wasn't super noticeable. Like, you could see it, and like we use like a black like cloth that we like put in the water, and when we brought it up, you could see the lights on it, like the sparkles. But I really was expecting to kind of just stand there and see a lot more of it as the waves hit. Like, you could see like every now and then little specks, but it wasn't like this big, glowing, beautiful water that I expected. And we went out to Playa Mosquito, I think that's the name of it. I'll double check and correct myself if I'm wrong. But we actually went out to that specific section. It was totally dark. So we weren't in like the main section where there are a lot of lights. We went where it was totally dark and still didn't really see anything. So yeah, the bioluminescent beach was pretty underwhelming. And just a heads up, the Wi-Fi is not that great on the island. So if you're going to disconnect, that's like, it's the perfect place if you want to go and just totally disconnect. But if you're going and you're trying to get remote work done, or you want to still kind of stay connected, just a heads up that the Wi-Fi is quite spotty. One of the things that surprised me was it was still very touristy. There were tons of gringos, and I kind of expected it to be a little bit more local. Maybe that was my misinterpretation of the island, but I thought that it was more so a destination that Mexicans went to vacation. And I definitely saw a lot of Americans there and a lot of people who weren't from Mexico there. So it was still a bit touristy. So for me, it begs the question of, if it's still gonna be this touristy and you have to go through all of this to get here, is it really worth the trek? Because if I'm gonna do touristy, then I could just stay in Tulum or Cancun, no? But for me, overall, it wasn't really worth all that it takes to get there. You know, the 2.5 hour car ride through the middle of nowhere where it's not really scenic at all, then the 30-minute ferry ride, then, you know, just, I unfortunately, you know, I will at least give credit. I'm sure that it is a lot nicer when it's not flooded, but unfortunately I was there during a time where it was pretty flooded, and it just took so long to get everywhere, and it got to the point where it just wasn't really fun. And I'm like, if I'm spending money to be somewhere, I don't want to have to get dirty and step in huge mud puddles, and you know, every time I come back to my hotel, my shoes are just like covered in mud. You know, like that's not really what I signed up for. So for me, keeping it real, I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. It was a good experience as far as like a learning experience, and you know, I'm happy that now I can like share this information with other people, and you can do what you want with it. If you still want to go for it. And I hope you have a totally different experience than me, or if you were on the fence, maybe like this helped you out a little bit. So, you know, I have no regrets, but I wouldn't do it again. And overall, I just don't think that for what it is worth all the work that it takes to get there. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope that it was helpful in some way. And if you had a totally different experience in Holbox, please let me know in the comments, or if you had a similar experience, also let me know. But that's all for now. I just wanted to keep it real for a second. Thanks.